Hi, Jesse. Skip Sherman here from Montreal, Canada. I wanted to congratulate you on 1,000 episodes. You are truly the hardest working man in podcasting and an inspiration to all of us indie podcasters out there who sometimes feel like, we're dancing in the dark. You should be incredibly proud of the community that you've built through your podcasts. Set Listing Bruce is, the must listen for all Springsteen fans. Congratulations, Jesse. Here's to another 1,000 episodes and to all the glory days ahead.
Well, the thing that everyone must always remember is that term rock and roll is indefinable, right? What is it? It's more than anything, it's an attitude, right? To put musical boundaries and fences around that word is impossible and wrong. So, Willie Nelson is a nominee this year. Does he belong in it? But as an outlaw country musician, that's a rock and roll attitude, right? So it's not just about the music. It's about the culture. It's about personalities. It's about your particular stance on stage and in a recording studio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, as we are counting down to 1,000 episodes. That is a lot of Bruce talk. I have Robert Santelli joining me, and you have a pretty cool job, don't you, Bob?
I do indeed. I do indeed. And I've had different kinds of jobs related to Bruce over the many, many years, but this one is probably the coolest.
Yeah, so if you could tell my guests a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, again, my name is Bob Santelli, and I grew up on the Jersey Shore, and I went to Monmouth University. I was in bands as a kid, all through college, and then became a music journalist in college. I was the entertainment editor of my college newspaper, which was at Monmouth University, which is where many of Bruce's very, very first fans came from. Because Bruce played there a few times, a couple of legendary, actually, performances at Monmouth University. It's also located just down the street where he wrote Born to Run, and conveniently located about 5 miles north of Asbury Park. So I spent my time there and became the Asbury Park music critic in the early 1970s. And from there, developed a career in music journalism, only to take a side view, if you will, or a side street, I guess you should say, and became a music museum curator. Was involved in the creation of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which got me out of New Jersey and onto this brand new thing that for the past 30 years I've been on, which is music museums, music journalism. So I went from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame to Paul Allen's Experience Music Project out in Seattle, now called MoPop, or Museum of Popular Culture. And then down to LA for the Grammy Museums that I built, and Woody Guthrie Center, all in all, some 8-9 music museums that I created. And now most recently, of course, I'm with Bruce Springsteen's Archives and Center for American Music. And also I teach and very much a part of what's going on here in the Northwest at Oregon State University as well.
It is kind of fun. You've come full circle, right?
Yeah.
You started you there at Monmouth, and now then you are at this point in your career, you've come home to work on all the things you've done your whole life, kind of getting together to do this for Bruce's Archives. It's got to feel satisfying.
Oh yeah, and that's deliberate. I had every intention of doing this. It was a dream, really, at first, and then slowly but surely over the years, last 5 or 6 years, it becomes a reality. So my intention always was, and people ask me, well, why at your stage of the career, why would you want to embark on something like this? And there's a couple of reasons for that, Jesse. I mean, first, it's I've always kept my identification and relationship with New Jersey. And my accent always gives me away anyway, so people know where I'm from. It's my region, the Jersey Shore is, I love the Jersey Shore, and it's my home, my spiritual home, as well as my early home as a young person. I went to Monmouth University. I taught there. I saw Bruce there in concert numerous times. It was a give back to my alma mater. And then, to be really honest with you, I rode Bruce's coattails as a journalist. Having known the band members and meeting Bruce for the first time as early as 1968, it allowed me access and the opportunities to write about him, the band, doing books with Max Weinberg and with Bruce. It's an opportunity to make sure that I played a little bit of a part of making sure his legacy was preserved in the right way, and it remained in New Jersey.
It is kind of fun. I was this summer to celebrate my birthday. My family, we all drove up to Tulsa and made a mini vacation out of it, going to see the Bob Dylan Museum and then the Woody Guthrie Museum. And at the time, there was a Bruce Springsteen live exhibit there, so it was just perfect. And I've urged everyone, I'm here in Texas, that this is definitely, it's a great weekend trip to go. If you want to get away, Tulsa is a wonderful city, and those two museums right next to each other is just really a lot of bang for your buck.
Oh, it is. They're great museums. They're sister museums, if you will, to what we're doing in Jersey.
Yeah.
Of course, I played a major part in the Woody Guthrie Center, not in the Bob Dylan Center, but the Woody Guthrie Center. And it's one of my favorite museums,
Yeah.
not in part because we developed it, because Woody Guthrie, like Bruce, he's meant a lot to me. I've written 3 books on him, and he is probably the most influential music person in my life, even more so than Bruce.
That's good. So I always like to start at the beginning. Growing up in Jersey, what kind of music did your family listen to? What were you listening to as a kid?
I was born in Jersey City, right across the river from New York. I'm Italian American, so that only means one thing: Frank Sinatra. Right, my earliest music memory is of Sinatra. My mother and father were big Sinatra fans. My mother was a Bobby Soxer, which of course was that first generation of hardcore Sinatra groupies. So it was that. And then, my father, I remember as a little boy, just prior to the arrival of the Beatles, we listened to the Four Seasons. Again, that whole Italian-American connection. We lived just a few miles from Newark, where that band was from. And so there was a connection to them. And then, of course, with the Beatles, once the Beatles hit, then I was off on my own then, in 1965, I was in the first row of a show in Newark, New Jersey with the Rolling Stones, first concert ever. 4 or 5 rows back, unbeknownst to me, was a very young, equally young Max Weinberg. And my father would always say, he was a New Jersey state trooper, by the way, very different from what I became. But he always would say, that's the night he lost his son. And what he meant essentially was that after seeing the Stones in person so up close, having seen the Beatles the year before on Ed Sullivan, I was hooked. I was already playing guitar as a 12-year-old or whatever I was, and totally committed to the music in a way that many other people of my generation, baby boom generation, did as well. The good news for me is that I never left it.
That is wonderful that you've been able to take this passion and make a living out of it, because a lot of us don't get that chance. So you've already mentioned not knowing that Max was in the room, but when can you remember when you first heard about Bruce and what about his music spoke to you?
Sure. Well, in 1966, my family moved out of where we were living in a city called West New York. It was west of New York, just west of the Hudson River on the Jersey side. And we moved down to the Jersey Shore. And I was in band, immediately got in bands down there as a kid. I was in high school. And a friend of mine, we went up to a place called Red Bank, New Jersey, which is a really cool community these days. But there was a coffee house up there. There were a lot of coffee houses and teen clubs all around New Jersey at the time. And I walked into this, they took me to this coffee house. And it's a long story, but I'll just say, I thought I was pretty cool because I was able to, as a really young kid, cross the river and hang out in Greenwich Village and spend my Saturdays looking for Bob Dylan. But I thought I knew music, and I thought I knew everyone, including a guy that I really thought was amazing called Tim Buckley. And Jeff Buckley, for those of you who are younger, Jeff Buckley's father. And I just thought his music was great. And here I am. I walked through the coffee house, and none of my friends had heard about Tim Buckley. And there's this guy playing solo guitar, and he's playing Tim Buckley music. I couldn't believe it. So I went up and after the set, and I introduced myself. And I said, "Man, do you know Tim Buckley?" And it was Bruce, and he was, this is 1968 or something like that. And then I had no other contact until the following year. I went to Monmouth College, and Steel Mill, one of Bruce's early bands, played my freshman orientation. We have the photograph actually in the archives. And that was it. I heard that band and went, wow. And from that point on, I would write about them if I could. And Steel Mill would play all over the Jersey Shore. They were certified rock stars in our area. They could play a free show on the beach and 3,000 people would show up, which was a lot of people for an unsigned band at that time. They were big stars. And of course, that's really where the true original Bruce Springsteen fans really come from. It's from the longest of the long, from the Steel Mill days. Bruce had 2-3 other bands prior to that, short-lived Earth and Child, and then, of course, the Castiles. But it was really Steel Mill because they developed a following, not just at the shore, but also in Richmond, Virginia, and elsewhere, up in Rutgers University, New Brunswick, and elsewhere. They were an amazing band. Imagine Cream meets the Allman Brothers meets Bruce Springsteen. And that's what Steel Mill was all about. And we were able to I've seen them a number of times when they played at Monmouth College and beyond. And I became a fan ever since.
So you've been able to go on with this this fandom. You have a wonderful book, Greetings from East Street, the story of the Bruce Springsteen, the band. I remember buying it back in when I first heard about it in 2011, and it's just been a wonderful book. Why did you decide to make music journalism what you wanted to do with your life? And then maybe kind of talk about how you got into the museum business. And I know that's a complicated question, but yeah.
I the week after the Beatles were on Ed Sullivan, I asked my mom for an electric guitar. It was very close to my birthday had passed, and just a few days. But and my dad had been at work and hadn't been home, and I said, "This is what I want for my birthday." So they got me an electric guitar, like so many thousands of other guys, young kids at that time in February of 1964, and self-taught. I wasn't anything special, but it just took me to the Beatles, and it just clicked. Like many people of my age say the same thing, who and Bruce included, Steve Van Zandt including. But I played and started, and I was very much influenced by Bob Dylan, living in West New York and having access to Greenwich Village and going over to Washington Square on Sundays and listening to the folk singers. All of this was just gathering it all up, And so when I moved down to the Jersey Shore, I got into bands, and I played in bands all through high school and college. And then my senior year in college, I was also an athlete, a big time, really, really involved in surfing. So I was very much in the surf scene back then as well. But I broke my hand, my left hand. I'm a lefty. I played guitar righty, but I broke my hand, and one finger just gave me a lot of problems, to the point where I couldn't play guitar for almost 2 years.
Wow.
And I gave it up. And the reason why is because equally important in my life was, even though I was not encouraged by my parents were working class, and I wanted to be a writer, and I was routinely discouraged by my parents not to do that. It's too safe. They're drug addicts. They're drunks. They lead bad lives. Become a teacher, which I was very interested in becoming as well. So I never really had that encouragement until later on. But I started to write in college, and I really fell in love with the idea that I can get into concerts for free, and I can get free records by giving people my opinion on music. I'm there. So I fell in love with that. There was my love of writing and my love of music. I married those two, and off I went, trying to build a career. Back then, you could actually have a career in music journalism. There were enough magazines. I didn't want to become a staff writer at the Asbury Park Press. I was offered a job, but I said I'll do it as a freelancer, which would allow me to write for many of the other music magazines that were in New York at the time. So I did that, had a great time. And this, of course, is mid-'70s. Bruce is breaking with Born to Run. So I was right there at ground zero, which was really exciting for me as a journalist and as a fan. Segue a few years ahead, and I'm writing for Rolling Stone. And I had just published a book that took me 3 years to write on the blues, called The Big Book of Blues. And Jan Wenner, who is the publisher of Rolling Stone, he is also really the godfather of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and then the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum. But he, long story short, deputized 5 of writers to become this new thing called Music Museum curators. None of us had any museum experience, or none of us were museum studies graduates. We're all music journalists. But I was a freelancer full time, and so I had 3 little kids at home, and so I said, I'll do it. I want to be a part of it, and I absolutely fell in love with it. It was just like journalism. You're telling stories instead of just using words, using pictures and artifacts, going out and finding the artifacts. It was 2.5 years of doing that. I just loved it, and when the opportunity came of those 5 music journalists who became music museum curators, 2 of us moved to Cleveland to actually open up the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. My music editor, the late James Henke, who moved with me, he became the head curator, and I switched over because I had teaching experience. I switched over to become out of curation, and I became the first director of education at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And that was close to 30 years ago, and I've been on that trail ever since.
So you ended up making your mom and dad happy by becoming a teacher.
Yes, I did.
I could see them. Oh, now, it doesn't matter all the books you've published. Now I can do.
That's true. That's true.
Is there a couple of stories about finding artifacts or finding things that you want to share?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would get on a plane, and because my area, every of the 5 writers, we all had expertise, and really why we were successful in our job. We all met. We had 18 months to build out 50,000 square feet of exhibit space. Now, to your listeners, you may not know what that is. That's a big museum, right? The average exhibit is about anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000. So you can imagine that's a lot of exhibits in a big area for people who did not know how to do this or had never done it before. What we did have that was brilliant was we had Rolodexes, so we could get people on the phone. So in my area, which was because I just come out of writing the Big Book of Blues, I knew all the roots people down in Mississippi, Louisiana, Nashville. And I knew a lot because I had always written about roots music. And it was something that was fascinated as I grew as a journalist, became really interested in how American culture and history married American music. And so that was where I was, And so I get on a plane in Newark Airport, and I'd head out for a week or two at a time, and I'd basically be scouring the Mississippi Delta or Louisiana or wherever it would take me, Nashville, to put together these exhibits. And there were lots of things where finding amazing howling wolf stuff, climbing in the attic that no one had been up there since his death. His wife, a little too feeble to get up there, and finding his guitar and all his books, dealing with New Orleans in the middle of the night and securing Professor Longhair material simply because the family was afraid that if it left New Orleans, they'd have problems, and I had to do it in the middle of the night, things like that. But clearly it was really, my father says you're like a rock and roll detective, you're following leads, and it was great. And I thought for sure I should have written, one of the five of us should have written about this because it had never been done before, so fast, so intensely, and with such naivete. And yet we opened that museum on time, on budget, to great acclaim. And it was one of the most exciting, from 1993 to 1995, I think it was one of the most exciting 2-year periods of my life, just because how exciting it was and how brand new this idea was, and that people couldn't believe what I was doing. And my other colleagues, they're dealing with punk or whatever. And I also dealt with reggae. I was, I lived, corresponded out of Jamaica as a music journalist, and everyone in my area was really interested in downtown New York scene with the Talking Heads and Blondie and punk. I was far more interested in Jamaica and reggae because I was a surfer, and I would go down every winter to surf in the Caribbean. So Bob Marley and those early reggae guys were my part of my, if you will, clients. So I spent time finding Bob's stuff, and then no one at the time, which is really interesting, we wanted to do something on Seattle, and none of my colleagues were interested in it. And I said, I'll do it. I'd never been to Seattle before. And so I put together the first Seattle exhibit, not knowing too much at the time about grunge, having so deeply been involved in reggae and American roots music. But that's how I got to the Northwest and fell in love with the Pacific Northwest, which is where I ultimately landed.
What do you say to people? Because every year there is a lot of angst on social media about the expanding base of who's going into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I always take it as it's called the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but the reality, it is pop culture music, right? There is a wide breadth. And, Dolly Parton, specifically said, hey, I don't know if I should be in this. And people have said, yes, you should. And she did this wonderful, I loved everyone doing Jolene with her at the end. There's other people coming in. Since you've been involved with this for a long time, what do you think about that?
Well, the thing that everyone must always remember is that term rock and roll is indefinable, right? What is it? It's more than anything, it's an attitude, right? To put musical boundaries and fences around that word is impossible and wrong. So, Willie Nelson is a nominee this year. Does he belong in it? But as an outlaw country musician, that's a rock and roll attitude, right? So it's not just about the music. It's about the culture. It's about personalities. It's about your particular stance on stage and in a recording studio. So hip hop is rock and roll under the broadest definition of it. Now, if you want to get really precise and talk musical definitions, well, it doesn't have a a blues progression in it or whatever. That's wrong, because rock and roll is not meant to be defined. When we started the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, there were a number of music critics who were absolutely positively against the concept of institutionalizing rock and roll. And they were adamant. They hated the fact that we were doing this. Eventually, they all came around to it. I'm happy to say, and relieved. But you can't you can't put the fence around the music or the term. And it's the same thing with jazz. How do you define jazz? How do you define blues? American music terms are, you cannot truly define them and be accurate. And so someone like Dolly Parton or Chuck D and Public Enemy or whomever. No, I believe that they could be in them. I understand the traditionalists where they're coming from. I just think they have to take a broader attitude toward it. And a lot of people say, you're doing it because you're running out of people. They're not running out of people. There's still a lot of people from the 60s and 70s that need to be inducted. And so that's not the reason. It's because taking the broadest definition and you're applying it the way it should be applied, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I like that answer. I think it makes a lot of sense. It is a wide, it cuts a wide just path.
Yeah.
And it is so inclusive. Whether you're like when Ken Burns' documentary on country music, or in his documentary on jazz, right? How far those roots go into it. So yeah, that's well said. I'm gonna use that next time I read someone doing that. Um, so Bruce is touring.
Yeah.
How exciting is that? Any thoughts on were you tempted to be in Tampa last night?
I could have been. I'm going to the Hollywood show,
Okay.
which is next week. We are very busy at the archives, and we have a couple of big announcements that hopefully your listeners will pay attention to in the next, I'd say in the next 3 or 4 weeks, that
Okay.
will be very much Bruce related. And so I've been up to my neck with my colleague Eileen Chapman. I know you've had on your podcast before.
Yes, I did. Wonderful person.
The director, one of my
Yeah.
best friends, and the director, me being the executive director. So we've been busy on that, but we will be at the Hollywood show, and then I'll pick and choose as we go along just to stay abreast of things. But quite honestly, I'm also trying to raise money for the archives as well. So following the tour in the places where I suspect there's, as we say in the business, a fat wallet, I'm going to try and be there and
Nice.
try and raise some money. But that's primarily what I'll be doing. Bruce spent part of the day with Bruce last Friday. Talking about things, and I know he was very excited. The next day, he was leaving this past Saturday for Florida. I know they're very excited. I spoke to Max and Gary before they went, and everyone's real excited. I heard great things about the first show. I'm looking forward to seeing them. But it's a long tour. They haven't been playing in a long time. That thing called COVID, of course, kept everyone grounded. But I'm sure Max wouldn't mind me telling you that all through COVID and all through this past year, he's been drumming. I mean, if there's someone who's in super shape in that band other than Bruce, it's Max Weinberg. I mean, he's the other athlete, of course, having to play the drums. So I expect great things, and I expect, as you know and your fans know and listeners, that the show will evolve. This is going to be a long tour, and we're just getting started. So it's going to be great to follow it and see ultimately how it develops into what it should be, the greatest rock and roll show of all time.
Yeah, I stole this line from one of my friends, but I say it all the time. With all apologies to Walt Disney World, the happiest place on earth is a Bruce Springsteen concert, right? Yeah, and I do think I've seen a little bit of fans debating, as fans do, and I think a lot of us remind people it's been 6 years since they toured. There is a whole group of people that have never seen the E Street Band perform live.
That's
They
right.
they they want they are desperate for everything. They want to hear everything, from all this. And Bruce has such a large catalog that it is hard to make everyone happy, because you're always going to be a song, oh, I wish he had done this, but it's unless he's going to play 12 hours,
That's
it's
right.
not going to happen.
That's
Yeah.
right. Right. I like to tell people that at the archives now, we're in the 50th anniversary business,
Okay.
because
Yes.
what we did was, you probably heard about, we had a great symposium at Monmouth University in early January last month, to celebrate and to really look back at Greetings, right? Greetings was released the first week in January of 1973. And so we tried to hit it as close to the actual date as possible. To be honest with you, Jesse, I had no idea what to expect. We had never done anything like this before. As you said, it's been such a long time since people connected with Bruce other than the albums. I thought maybe we get 50 to 100 people. We got 600 people. And this is an album that, if you're a huge fan of Greetings, you're probably older, right?
Right.
There are a lot of people who come on board who are in their 40s and 50s, for Born in the USA, right?
Right.
But to go back and have an emotional and true connection to Greetings, I figured, it's not that many people around. Well, they came in from Ireland, they came in from Europe, came in from all over America. 600 people probably could have sold another 200 tickets if we had the room. So I was really encouraged by the kind of questioning and the support and enthusiasm. It was comforting for me as a Springsteen fan to know that these fans still connect as far back as a half century ago. That's pretty incredible. So Bruce's impact on people is not only impressive and long, but deep. And we saw that at the Greetings conference. And I will tell you that shortly, yet another announcement we'll make is, we'll follow now the quote 50th anniversary business. As I said,
Sure.
many fans and listeners know that he also released Wild Innocent, E Street Shuffle in 1973, in late October, November of 1973. So we will be doing another conference, another symposium at Monmouth University to celebrate Wild Innocent. So pretty exciting. And the expectation is we'll have just as many people and just as much excitement as we did at the first.
I absolutely do think you will. And I know that that's on my bucket list to come out, and make one of these seminars. Is the ultimate goal to have a public facing facility, museum, to show some of these artifacts?
Not so much a museum, but yeah, we have pretty ambitious plans. We're in the process of putting it all together. If any of you visited the archives, and of course, you're all welcome to do it. Eileen is there, and she's very proud of what she and her team has done. We're bursting at the seams. We are literally bursting at the seams. We took Bruce through on Friday, and he was flabbergasted at the amount of materials there. And he walked in on 6 Monmouth University students who were busy at work categorizing and things, and we didn't tell them that Bruce was going to stop by. And of course, they freaked out, and they were so excited to see the guy that they've been dealing with for the last 3 or 4 years of their college career.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's something. We have very ambitious plans, and we want to make sure that it's fully accessible to the general public. Remember, we are the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music. And that's in part because of Bruce's insistence that if we were going to do this, I wouldn't do it without his support, and he's okay with it. And he said to me something a few years ago that I thought was very telling, and it's our mantra. He says, Bob, I am a chapter in the ongoing story of American music. That's what I am. I'm not the story. If you're going to make me the story, I'm uncomfortable with that. Make me a chapter, make me a part, and tell the bigger story of American music at the same time you're telling mine. That would make sense to me. And I think that would be useful to people and teachers, et cetera. And that's why we're the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music. So that Center for American Music allows us to do all kinds of exhibits and all kinds of things. And that excites me very, very much because of my love of American music in general, not just Bruce music. We'll do things on the blues, or we'll do things on punk or cowboy music or whatever we want. I mean, they all fall under this huge banner of American music.
What is the best way if fans want to support this project? Is there a way that we can help
Sure.
do this, support it?
Jesse, many fans have already. I mean, we get donations all the time. We are up to about 37,000 pieces. I mean, think about that. And then that includes, one piece is a magazine, right? Or
right.
It could be a photograph. So, it's not artifacts. We'd be like the Smithsonian then.
Right.
But we do. I mean, we have incredible support from fans. And as original fans, first generation fans, I'll call them, get older, and they have collections, and they realize, what am I going to do with this? I should put it to good use. And we get a call at the archives. Eileen does. And, some things, we're not really interested in taking someone's album collection. We got a lot of that. But you'd be surprised what fans send us. It's fantastic. I mean, we have some early posters that fans have said, look, I had this because I was at this show in 1970 or whatever. And so it's been terrific. Our hope is to make all of this accessible through a digital experience. We have a website, SpringsteenArchives.org, and people can go on that website. Soon you'll be able to financially donate if you'd like. We now have some swag and T-shirts and hats that you can buy to help support. It is a 501c3. It is a fully nonprofit venture, an educationally driven 501c3. So again, as the tour begins, we're going to kind of piggyback the tour with information about who we are and what we're doing. That's why I said earlier that we're going to make a couple of huge announcements in the next month or so, and we'll make sure that you and your people know about it, and even to come back on your show if necessary.
Oh, yeah, I would love that, because I do know that one of the things that my wife and I love doing is going to presidential museums. We just love, regardless of the politics, just seeing the history that happened, whether it's President Bush, President Johnson, President Clinton, President Carter. Just it's amazing, that slice of their life. So I absolutely would want to support that, and I know my audience would too. So I don't want to take too much of your time, but is there anything, any special songs or albums of Bruce's catalog that means a lot to you?
Of course. Now you're asking me to put on my fans hat, right?
Yes, I am taking off the executive director, putting on your fans hat. Yes.
Well, clearly, before I do that, let me put back my old music critics hat.
Yes.
And I have always been of the belief, and I try not to celebrate this too much because people think I'm biased, but I think the greatest rock and roll record of all time is the Born to Run album. I think it checks every box for me for what a perfect rock and roll record can and should be. So with that said, obviously one of my favorite, if not my favorite album is Born to Run. There's no question about it. And because I go back the early days, certainly I have very strong feelings for Greetings, and especially Wild Innocent. I remember hearing killer versions of Kitty's Back, which, by the way, he played in Tampa, I'm told.
I saw that, yes.
It's one of my favorites, and so I'm partial to them. But then as you get up, into the latter stuff, I really thought a very brave, courageous move was to put out Tunnel of Love. Here were his fans growing older and dealing with marriage and issues with relationships, and he explored that so brilliantly on that album. And I love the song Tunnel of Love. Having worked on the boardwalks of Jersey, I know that particular ride, Tunnel of Love, intimately, and so I thought he just captured it so well. And then I would say probably people might be surprised, but I am also a fan of Human Touch. I love the song Human Touch. And then as we move forward, I think Magic is probably an album that I identify with greatly as well. But I'm truly an old school Springsteen fan. So when you talk about the things that are real personal to me as a fan, it's the early albums.
Yeah, I do. I was a casual fan, um, and then in 2002, I went to my first show, The Rising, and that's where I went from casual to fanatic. And
Yeah.
so I have a lot of emotional attachment to a lot of the later albums
Sure.
because of that,
Yeah.
And so, and I do think it all depends on when you become a fan,
Right.
right? What is it? Similar to, um, the Doctor Who fandom, right? There's always, they talk about who's their doctor
That's
because
right.
that was the actor who was doing it. So what is their era of Springsteen? And one of my favorite stories, Bob, is I had a guy on who'd been a fan for years. And he said that in 1999, he was sitting in the pit, standing in the pit at a reunion tour. And he said, well, this is it. It's never going to get any better than this.
Mhm.
He fired the band. They've come back. They've performed again. We might get a tour every couple of years, but this is the ultimate of the E Street Band. And he says, I want to go back to that guy and say, you don't know what's coming. You don't understand that we're getting The Rising, we're getting Wrecking Ball, we're getting Magic, we're getting an autobiography, we're getting him on Broadway. That was the halfway point,
Yeah.
not even the close to the end.
Yeah. No question. And I think he has a lot more in the tank.
I think he does.
Healthy and in shape, and his connection to the music has not suffered 1 minute.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that he did the new soul album. I mean, this is something that he wanted to do and for a long time. And I know how much that music meant to him as a kid growing up. Being around Asbury Park, a lot of people know Asbury Park today and its great renaissance, but back in the 60s, it was very much a segregated town, literally by the railroad tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And Bruce and friends would go over to the African-American side and hear some of the great soul music that the tri-state, New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area could offer. And it was an education. And I think that record for him is a payback to that as well. That love affair that began as a teenager now can come to fruition in a record that fans may wonder why he did it. This was always in Bruce, and I'm so glad he did it.
So me too. And I just a couple of people like, well, why? And I go, why not? And it's such a joy. It is such a joy to hear. I was so glad that they did a couple of songs live. It is, and I, of course, biased. I'm doing a podcast about him and his fans, but I love the fact that he keeps pushing himself and the band to creatively, to do new things, to do different things, to explore different avenues. And I think that's all you want from a creative person. I think that's what all of us want,
Sure.
in our creative lives, to try to make, to keep pushing ourselves and have fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Bob, I could talk to you for an hour more, but I'm not going to do that. I do want to, though, I end every podcast with the Mary question. So for those of you who are listening because Bob is awesome, Jay Armstrong, who is an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area, recently retired, would spend 2 days with his honors English class talking about Thunder Road. They would go through the lyrics. He would talk about the imagery. They would talk about the themes that Bruce explores in that poem. And then at the end of the 2 days, he would ask the question, does Mary get in the car? So, Bob, that is your question. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
Well, if she's truly from New Jersey, she probably does. And the reason being is because back in the 1970s, you have to understand, if you're not from Jersey, it's probably hard for you to understand. But I will tell you this, we were the butt of many jokes from Johnny Carson and other late night hosts. We were caught between Philly and New York. Our self-respect was hardly anything. The goal always was to get out of New Jersey. as a young kid and a surfer, my friends and I, our dream was to move to the promised land, which was California. And ultimately, all of us did at one point. But Mary gets in the car because that's what the whole concept of escape from this thing called Jersey was all about. Bruce comes along and almost single-handedly changes that. I say almost single-handedly because when the New York Football Giants began playing in New Jersey, even though they still called themselves the New York Giants, which hurt us deeply, but we finally had an identifiable thing, a football team, even though they were from across the river. Bruce is the first genuine, absolute, born and raised, person from New Jersey. I always admired him. I just told him this again recently, that the fact that you demanded that you were from New Jersey when they wanted to make you a New York artist, and you called that first album Greetings from Asbury Park. I don't think he knew how important that was to so many young people at the time. It gave us a sense of respect. All of a sudden, for many of us, it was at least semi-cool to be from New Jersey, to the point where I remember I moved out to California to go to grad school at the University of Southern California. And it was 1978. And I showed up in San Diego at a bar because Bruce was playing there. And I had on my Stone Pony t-shirt, which I wore as a badge of honor. And it was torn and ripped. And some really cool Southern California guy with puka shells and a Hawaiian shirt walked up to me in the bar. And he said, I'd like to buy your t-shirt. And obviously, this is in Springsteen area. It was just outside of the arena where he was playing. I thought he was being a wise ass. And I said, get out of here, And he says, no, man, I mean it. Name your price. And I said, back in 1970, $100. And he said, and I said, and your shirt. And he said, okay. We went into the men's room. We exchanged shirts. I walked out with $100 and a whole new appreciation of, oh my goodness, Jersey, you've come, you've made it. Thanks to Bruce, we're somebody. And I told that story more than once, but it was a defining factor for me. And it made me feel like, okay, people are recognizing that we got something. There's something about Jersey. And of course, Bruce is the living embodiment of that. And his music is a representation of that. And I have to tell you, it made my month. I mean, it was really, really, really a special thing for me, on top of a great show in San Diego.
That is awesome. If someone wants to reach you, what's the best way?
Through Eileen at the archives. I
Okay.
travel a lot. I'm bouncing around. I don't do Twitter. I don't do any. I just
Okay.
can't keep up with it. So
Yeah.
it's just a simple one, or you can just write to Springsteen Archives. That's why I try and answer everyone
Okay.
eventually.
Yeah.
But on the road quite a bit, doing all the things that we're trying to do keeps me
Absolutely.
busy. So.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you. Hang on, Bob, while I do a little business. Listeners, go out to the website, check it out, bookmark it, because there's big things coming, and you want to make sure you see it in plenty of time. Once there's swag available, we're going to want to put a little bit of our monies that's not going to concert tickets to help the archive. For now, though, be safe, be kind, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. There we go, another episode. I'm about to go through a couple of things where you can reach me and give me feedback. So if you want to skip this, I understand. But I do hope you check it out every once in a while. I'm available on Twitter at Jesse Jackson DFW. The show is available at setlistingbruce. You can send me an email, setlistingbruce@gmail.com. You can send me a voicemail at 469-249-2442. I am currently doing a few other podcasts. Perfectly Good Podcast, John Hyatt from A to Z, where Sylvan Groth and I discuss every John Hyatt song in alphabetical order. My Babylon 5 podcast is Last Best Hope for Conversation, where Lou, Karen, and I discuss every episode of Babylon 5 in chronological order. I still am doing Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast with my brother in time, Charles Skaggs. And then finally, How Many Podcasts, the only podcast on the internet that counts, where my buddies and I discuss pop culture. You can go to our Patreon page and support the podcast for as little as $1 a month. You can go to our Facebook page, and please go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcast and leave a 5-star rating and review for all of the podcasts that I'm doing. It's okay if you don't listen to them, but if you subscribe and rate, it really will make my day better. Thank you, and I will talk to you soon.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.